The first contact we never wanted. The planet was called Earth, and every Garlac knew its name only because it came with a warning label across every star map we owned. Earth was a death world, a place marked red in every galactic archive. A world where the air was too thin, the gravity too heavy, and the wildlife too aggressive. And worst of all, it was home to humans. The species no one had ever dared to approach, the species who had earned the name Deathworlders by surviving and thriving in chaos. We were taught to avoid them, to fear them, and to never ever land near them. But fate does not care about fear or rules. Commander Travak's ship had been on a patrol mission along the edge of human space when an unexpected solar flare struck their vessel. The ship was thrown off course, engines failing, oxygen levels dropping fast. The crew tried everything to stay in orbit, but the gravity of Earth was too strong. With no control, no support, and no time to send a distress signal, they crashed. Metal screamed fire burst through the hull and everything went black. When Travak opened his eyes, he was not dead. That fact alone terrified him. He was lying on a soft bed surrounded by machines he couldn't recognize. The room was too bright, the temperature too warm, and the air too clean for a battlefield. Panic surged in his chest. He tried to sit, but his arms were restrained by some kind of soft straps. He struggled with his 4 fingers clawing at the sides of the bed. Then a voice spoke, and it wasn't Garlac. It was humane. "You're safe now," the voice said, calm and gentle. "Don't move too much, your body is still healing." Travak froze. The human was standing beside him. It was smaller than his pale skin, dark hair, eyes soft but alert. It wore a white coat and held something in its hand, a scanner maybe. Travak's instincts screamed to fight, to defend himself, but the restraints held him down, and the human made no move to harm him. "I am Dr. Sarah Monroe." The human said, "You crashed near our base. We brought you here. You were badly hurt." Travak couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had studied human behavior from a distance. Aggression, dominance, warfare. Every record, every council report warned that humans were violent and unpredictable. But this human was healing him. Why? Travak asked, his voice raspy from the breathing tube they had just removed. "Why help me?" Sarah looked surprised. "Because you needed help." "That's what we do." He stared at her eyes, trying to detect sarcasm or cruelty, but found none. Only kindness, but that didn't make sense. Kindness from a human? Impossible. This must be some trick. A trap. He looked around the room. No weapons, no soldiers. Just monitors and medical equipment, and another Garlac resting quietly in the next bed. His second-in-command still alive. Days passed. Travak recovered slowly and watched the humans with suspicion. But each day they treated him the same. They brought him food. They adjusted his bandages. They smiled. He was never tortured, never questioned, never even locked behind steel walls. He was a guest, not a prisoner. When he was finally allowed to walk, he followed Sarah through the base. Soldiers trained in silence. Engineers worked with strange machines. But everyone greeted him like he was normal. No one mocked him or showed fear. It confused him. Humans had every reason to be arrogant, yet they acted like friends. In the mess hall he heard laughter. Human children playing with small machines. A human soldier gave him a cup of something called coffee, too bitter, but strangely addicting. Sarah laughed when he made a face and offered sugar. The moment felt real, not a trick, not a trap. Real. One night he couldn't sleep. He walked outside to the observation deck. The stars looked the same, familiar but distant. He thought of his people, of the warnings he had grown up with. Then he heard footsteps behind him. It was Sarah. "You were thinking about your people, aren't you?" she said, standing beside him, arms crossed against the cold. "They will not believe this," Travak said. "They believe humans are monsters." She smiled gently. "Maybe we were once. Maybe we still are to those who only read our past. But you're here now. You've seen who we are today." He looked at her. Her face was open and honest, without masks. For the first time in his life, he questioned the truth he had been told since childhood. Maybe monsters were not born. Maybe they were misunderstood. He sent a message to the Gorlok High Command that night. One simple line, "They are not what we believed," but deep inside Truvok knew that his message would not be received with joy. Something was coming. His people would not stay quiet. They would come for him. And the humans he had grown to respect, and when that day arrived, Truvok had to decide whose side he would stand on, because now he knew something terrifying, and beautiful humans were not Deathworlders. Were protectors, and maybe, just maybe, they were the future. The history they tried to hide, the Galactic archives had taught Truvok one truth: humans were the mistake of evolution, a species that somehow survived everything the universe threw at them, and then used that survival to become dangerous. But now, as he walked the halls of Earth's military base, eating their food, talking to their people, breathing their air, he realized how much he did not know. He realized how much his people had hidden from him. Dr. Sarah noticed his silence more often. Now he asked fewer questions, gave shorter answers, but she knew his eyes were always moving, always watching, always thinking. One afternoon, as he sat quietly in the medical recovery lounge, she brought a datapad and placed it in front of him without saying a word. The screen lit up and showed footage, images, documents, all translated into Galactic script, and he stared at it in confusion. "What is this?" he asked, slowly scanning the first page, and feeling something cold stir in his chest. "It's our history," she said gently, and then she walked away, letting him read alone. He read for hours, and the more he read, the less he moved. It was not just war, it was madness. Earth had burned again, and the humans never stopped. They built empires, and then destroyed them. They fought over skin color, water borders, even the stars. They dropped fire from the sky and drowned cities in nuclear winds, and yet each time they rebuilt stronger, faster, more united, until one day the wars became smaller and the rebuilding never stopped. He saw video footage of 2 world wars and the fall of their cities. He saw machines they built for death tanks, submarines, aircraft, and then the leap into space. The human brain never rested. If they weren't fighting, they were inventing, and if they weren't inventing, they were surviving. He saw the images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, then of the moon landing, then of the Mars colonies, and he asked himself how one species could contain so much destruction and yet use it to create beauty, how they could suffer so much and still smile like Sarah did when she offered him that sweet coffee. The datapad didn't hide anything that shocked him the most. They didn't edit out their mistakes. They didn't erase the darkness. They showed it openly, like scars worn with pride. "This is who we were," they seemed to say, "and this is who we became." Truvok's hands shook as he reached the modern records. Earth now belonged to a united human coalition. No single ruler, no empire, just representatives and elected leaders, still messy, still flawed, but working together. And the military, the one he was standing in now, was not for conquest. It was for defense, for peacekeeping, for helping colonies under attack from pirates or unstable alien powers. Put down the pad and stared at the wall in silence. Everything his people feared about humans was true, and yet it was also a lie. They were monsters once. Yes, but they had fought those monsters within themselves, and won, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to make a new path, and that was more terrifying than anything. Later that night, Truvok found Sarah sitting in the tech lab watching a simulation of Starship repair drones. He sat beside her, not speaking at first, then said in a low voice, "We thought you were hiding your past, that you were pretending to be better than you are. But you are not hiding it, you are showing it to everyone, even us." She didn't look away from the screen, but her voice was clear. "We believe that truth heals, even if it hurts first." He nodded slowly and then asked, "Why do you show it to outsiders? Isn't it dangerous? Won't we use it against you?" Sarah smiled and finally turned to him. "If someone uses your truth to harm you, then they were never meant to be allies," she said. "But if they see it and still stand beside you, then they are family." That word again, family, it echoed in his mind, because the Galactic never used that word beyond blood. But here on Earth, humans used it for friends, comrades, even aliens sometimes. Family was not born, it was chosen. Travak stood and walked to the window, looking out at the earth. Sky stars blinking in silence above, and he thought about how close his people were to declaring war, how quickly they would label him as compromised, corrupted, weak. But now he knew the truth, and once known it could not be. Unknown humans were not just survivors, they were teachers of pain and strength. And rebirth. He sent another message that night, but longer this time, and encrypted it deeply so High Command wouldn't intercept it easily. It said, if we fear them, then we fear what we could become, because in them I see not death but evolution. He didn't know if anyone would read it or care, but it no longer mattered. He was changing, and that change had started with one crash, and one human, and one history that didn't hide from its shadows. In the morning, Sarah greeted him with that same soft smile and handed him a fresh cup of coffee, and for the first time since his crash, Travak smiled back, not because he was healed, but because he finally understood who the humans really were. Not monsters, not saviors. Just beings who walked through fire and kept walking the test of trust. Travak stood at the edge of the landing pad watching a group of human engineers laugh while fixing a damaged transport drone, and in that moment, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, something heavy but not painful, something warm but not soft. It was trust, not complete, not blind, but the beginning of it, and that scared him more than any human weapon. He had spent weeks on Earth, now walking freely, learning their systems, eating their food, listening to their music, and watching the way they treated each other, not like perfect beings, not like saints, but like people trying hard every single day and failing sometimes, but always getting back up and trying again. It reminded him of stories his grandfather told of the early Galactic tribes, before technology, before control, when heart and honor meant more than orders. He had sent messages to his people, short, encrypted transmissions, each more honest than the last, and though he had not received a single reply, he knew they were watching and listening. The silence was not ignorance, it was judgment. That morning, Sarah handed him a small device. It was a gift, not from her, but from the base commander, a personal translator chip designed to be implanted just below the ear. No need for external tech, no more delay in understanding. Every word would come instantly and clearly. It was a sign of deep trust. Humans did not hand out such tech lightly, but Travak hesitated, staring at the device as if it might explode. Sarah noticed, of course. She always did. Her gaze was calm but sharp, like a doctor reading symptoms before a diagnosis. You're thinking too much again, she said. The chip won't bite. He didn't laugh. He simply said, why now? Why give me this when you already speak my language? She replied, because it's not about speech, it's about hearing each other without barriers. Those words stayed with him all day as he sat in the Human War archive reading about something called the Cold War. A time when humans pointed weapons at each other for decades, waiting for the other side to blink, but never firing, and then finding peace through exhaustion, not through victory. He couldn't decide if that was wisdom or madness or both. That night his answer arrived, not through a message, but a shadow outside his room. A Galactic figure cloaked in dark armor, stepping silently into the hallway where Travak waited, and when their eyes met, the past crashed into the present. The figure removed the hood, revealing a face Travak knew better than his own, his brother, Commander Varen, sent by High Command. They embraced briefly, more habit than warmth, then sat across from each other without a word for a long time, until Varen finally spoke. Your transmissions were received. Your words have been reviewed. You have changed, brother, and not for the better. Travak did not respond at once. He only watched his brother's hands, noticing the subtle twitch near the thumb, a sign of inner conflict. He remembered it from their youth, whenever Varen was forced to do something he did not agree with. You are here to take me back, he said quietly, or to silence me. Varen's silence was the answer. Sarah entered the hallway just then, holding a data tablet, and froze when she saw Varen. Her eyes narrowed, not with fear, but calculation. She could tell something was wrong. Her hand hovered near her waist, where a silent alarm could be triggered, but Travak raised his hand slowly and shook his head. It's all right, he said calmly. He is my brother. That word hit harder than any threat, and Varen's jaw tightened. They stood facing each other, one raised among warriors, the other reborn among what their people once called monsters. You don't understand them, Trovak said, his voice low but steady. They are dangerous, yes, but they choose peace. They have earned the right to be heard, not feared, Varen replied. Then show me. He pulled a small chip from his belt, the same kind of recording unit Trovak once used. Prove it to me. Show me why you trust them. So Trovak did. He walked Varen through the base. No guards, no barriers, no threats. He introduced him to Sarah and the human engineers, to the AI technician named Malik, who shared his entire drone program without hesitation, to a young recruit who showed Varen how to plant a tree in the community greenhouse just for fun, not profit, not war, just life. By nightfall, Varen sat alone watching children laugh in the common area, and when Trovak sat beside him, he asked softly, do they know what you are? Do they know you were sent to spy? Yes, Trovak answered, and they still shared everything with me. Varen was silent again, and in that silence, Trovak saw something breaking, something important, not weakness, but the first crack in a wall built by fear and propaganda. When Varen left 3 nights later, he said nothing, but as he boarded his stealth vessel, he handed Trovak the recording chip. It's full, he said. Send it to High Command with your words. I will not speak against you. And then he was gone. Trovak stared at the stars after that, and for the first time since his crash, he felt no fear, only a responsibility, heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Because now he knew he was not just a guest on Earth, he was a bridge between species, and that bridge would either bring peace or war, depending on how strong he could stand in the storm that was coming. A brother's blade. The Gorlak do not send brothers on missions of mercy, and Trovak knew this truth as clearly as he knew his own name, which is why when Varen left Earth without violence, Trovak could not relax, not for a moment, because silence from High Command was never silence, it was strategy. It was the sound before a blade moved through the air, and the next storm came not with warships, not with fire, but with a handshake. 2 weeks after Varen's departure, the base received a formal transmission from Gorlak Command requesting a diplomatic visit, a meeting between representatives of Earth and the Gorlak Empire. And Trovak read that message 3 times, knowing it was not a request, it was bait, and still the humans said yes, because that is what they do. They open doors, they smile into storms, they believe peace is possible, even when they are preparing for war. In the background, visitors arrived under the cover of calm, a small shuttle with 4 Gorlak diplomats dressed in ceremonial robes, polished scales, high-collared uniforms, and words dipped in honey. Trovak stood beside Sarah as they landed, and his stomach twisted when he saw the last to step out, because it was not just any diplomat, it was Commander Renak from the Outer Discipline Corps, a man who had executed rebels with a smile and lectured about loyalty with blood on his hands. Renak bowed and shook hands with General Mason, the human base leader, his face unreadable, his tone pleasant, but Trovak watched his eyes and saw the cold calculation behind them. This was not peace, this was a test, and if the humans failed, there would be consequences. For 3 days meetings were held, data was shared, food exchange, tours given, and Trovak was present at every moment, watching both sides carefully, and yet he felt the trap tightening because Renak asked too many questions about base defense, about transport protocols, about Earth's outer colonies, and he smiled too much when humans talked about unity and openness. On the 4th night, a silent alarm triggered in the base security core, and Trovak was already moving before the lights even flickered. Sarah met him in the hall, tablet in hand, her voice sharp and fast. Someone accessed the command wing without authorization. Code came from a Gorlak datapad. Trovak didn't need to hear more, he knew exactly what was happening. Reached the command wing just as the breach was sealed, and inside they found Renak standing near the main AI core, his hands raised calmly as security drones surrounded him. He spoke before anyone else could with that same rehearsed voice. I was merely curious. Your technology is impressive, so very different from our own general. Mason stepped forward without raising his weapon. You were warned not to enter restricted areas. This is not how allies behave. Renak smiled wider. Perhaps I misunderstood your openness. I thought humans shared freely, or perhaps you fear what we might learn. That was the final thread. Trevek stepped between them, his voice no longer uncertain, no longer diplomatic. Renek, your orders were not to observe, but to provoke and maybe worse, to sabotage. If the opportunity came, do not lie here, not in this place, not to these peopler. Hanek's expression shifted just slightly, and in that flicker Trevek saw the truth. This had never been about peace. This was a performance for High Command, a setup. If humans responded with fear or force, the Galactic would use it as proof of aggression and justification for war. But the humans hadn't taken the bait, and now Renek had failed. The next morning, Renek and his delegation left Earth without ceremony, without threat, just cold smiles and quiet whispers. And Trevek knew it was not over. It was only paused because now the humans had passed the test, and the Galactic didn't know what to do with that kind of answer. Later that evening, as he walked the garden path near the greenhouse, Trevek found Sarah sitting alone, her eyes scanning a report on the incident, her expression unreadable, like stone carved by storm. And when she looked up, he saw no fear, only exhaustion. He sat beside her and spoke softly. I should have stopped it sooner. I should have warned you more clearly. She shook her head. No, you warned us in the way that mattered. And you stood between us when it counted. Not many would do that. Ravak looked out across the quiet base, the stars blinking above like silent witnesses to everything, and he realized that his role here had changed. He was no longer a guest or a bridge. He was a shield, and shields must break before they let others fall. They both sat in silence for a long while, until Sarah finally asked, what happens now? And Trevek answered honestly, now they will try again, not through words, not through visits, but through fear, through manipulation, maybe even through allies of their own. But next time we will be ready, and they will not find us so easily divided. She nodded once, and then smiled just a little. You really have become one of us. And Trevek did not deny it, because somewhere between the crash and the betrayal, between the coffee and the garden, between the test and the truth, he had become more than a Galactic, more than a commander. He had become a believer in something stronger than survival. He had become a believer in humans. And the galaxy was not ready for what that meant. The day of decision. The day began with no alarm, no warning, no sudden noise or blinking light, just a quiet message blinking at the top of Earth base Central. A long-range scan triggered by an outer satellite net. One of Earth's deep space observers had picked up a fleet. It was Galactic, not a trade convoy, not a diplomatic escort or war formation. They were not broadcasting peace codes. They were not hiding either. They came with precision and confidence. More than 50 warships crossing neutral zones, without pause shields. Raised weapons not charged but primed, a posture of intimidation without the first strike. It was a move designed to paralyze Earth with uncertainty, and Trevek recognized the pattern immediately. It was how the Galactic had conquered lesser colonies in the past. Push forward without firing, let the enemy trip first, and use that as justification for cleansing. General Mason stood in the command center surrounded by his officers, his face unreadable as the data scrolled past. The numbers were clear. Earth was outnumbered and outgunned. If this became a war, the damage would be global, and Trevek knew the Galactic were counting on that. He also knew the humans would not back down. We do not respond with fire, Mason said, his voice steady as iron. We respond with clarity. Prepare the broadcast room, notify the council, bring the translators into the chamber. If they want to watch us, let them see all of us. The base moved like a living thing, but not in panic. There was order even in urgency. Soldiers moved gear, scientists reinforced satellite arrays, medical teams organized underground safety routes. But above all, the humans did something no Galactic strategist would have expected. They gathered their people, not just leaders, not just military, everyone, engineers, janitors, teachers, children, civilians from nearby colonies, even old veterans in wheeled chairs. They all arrived at the central hall, the largest chamber on the vast. Trevek stood near the back watching as Sarah guided a group of young students into the crowd, and he couldn't help but stare at their small hands, their curious eyes, their total absence of fear. They were not hiding. They were not being shielded. They were part of the answer. When The time came the broadcast began not just to the Galactic fleet, but to the entire interstellar communication grid, live and unedited. A single camera faced the wide stone stage where General Mason stood beside scientists, civilians, and children alike, and his speech was not long, not dramatic, but simple and unforgettable. We are Earth. We are not perfect. We are not harmless, but we are not alone anymore. This is not a threat, it is a promise. We stand together, and we will not kneel. The camera pulled back, showing the thousands gathered behind him, people of all skin colors, species, genders, ages, standing under one flag. And then in total silence, the camera panned further to show what waited behind them, a line of war machines, silent weapons, deactivated, but ready. Earth's arsenal displayed openly, but not aimed, a show of power. Held in restraint, a blade still in the sheath. It was the most human message Trevak had ever seen. We can destroy, but we choose not to, and we invite you to do the same. For hours the Galactic fleet hovered unmoving, their ships forming a steel wall across the edge of Earth space, and then one by one, they began to shift, not closer, but away. They turned slowly, maintaining formation, returning to neutral space. No shots fired, no final message, just silent retreat. Redek stood on the observation deck long after they vanished from radar, watching the stars as if they might speak back to him. He felt no joy, no victory. What had happened was not a win, it was survival earned through restraint, not force, and that was something the Galactic would not understand. Not yet, maybe not ever. Sarah found him there later, her coat draped over one arm, her hair tied back as usual. She said nothing at first, just stood beside him until he finally spoke. They came ready to break. You answered by showing them what could not be broken. She smiled softly, and it was not pride on her face. It was sorrow. They came expecting fear and found unity. And that scares them more than any weapon. Trevak turned to her. Now you understand why I stayed, not because I was captured, but because I saw something here that my people lost long ago, and maybe if they see it again, there is still hope. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the diplomatic sigil once worn by Galactic ambassadors, and he placed it in her hand. I want you to keep this because soon they will ask again, and next time I will not just speak, I will stand. Sarah looked at the sigil, then back at him, and her voice was low and steady. Then we stand with you, not behind, not ahead, beside, always. That night the base held no celebration, no fireworks, no parades. Instead they lit small lamps across the garden paths, each light placed by a child in silence in honor of peace that held for one more day. And Trevak watched them with a feeling that had no name, something beyond loyalty or even friendship. It was belief in a future where monsters learned to put down their blades, belief that trust was more than a treaty, belief that maybe, just maybe, Earth had not just survived the universe, but had begun to change it. When humans unite, the Galactic had pulled back, but they had not surrendered, and Trevak knew retreat was only a step in their long strategy. High Command would regroup. They would spread stories across allied system, stories of human deceit, of human aggression, of how Earth had built its power not through peace, but through manipulation and destruction, and slowly one by one neutral species would begin to wonder if the Deathworlders were truly allies or just waiting for the right moment to conquer again. Trevak knew the pattern because he had once believed it himself, until Earth taught him something stronger than fear. It taught him unity. In the days that followed, Earth sent invitations, not warnings, not demands, just open communication to old allies and new worlds, to trading colonies and frontier settlements, even to species who had once fought against humanity, and the message was the same: come and speak. We will not ask for your loyalty, we will only offer truth. And one by one they came, small ships at first, trade vessels, scout cruisers, diplomats riding in outdated crafts, and worried eyes. But when they landed, they were greeted by civilians, not soldiers, by children offering water, and engineers offering tools, by artists painting welcome banners on walls that still carried scars from the last war. And Trevak watched it unfold with something like awe, because humans were not fighting for trust. They were living it. The base transformed. Into a symbol of more than survival, it became a living answer to fear, where every room spoke of shared knowledge and every hallway echoed in 100 different languages. Travak became the bridge between cultures, guiding alien guests through systems once forbidden to outsiders, teaching them what Earth had taught him about honesty, about rebuilding, about choosing to stand together when running apart was easier. High Command did not stay silent. They began broadcasting across the neutral zones, not with war fleets this time, but with voices. They accused Travak by name, called him broken, called him a traitor. They declared Earth a manipulator planet, a threat dressed in peace. They spoke of old wars, twisted truths retold, pain as prophecy. And fear began to rise again like smoke before fire, and still Earth did not raise its weapons. Instead, Earth called a council, not a war summit, but a unity gathering, and it was not held in a military base, but in a public garden grown on the ruins of a fallen city, a place where humans had once lost thousands to war, and now built homes with their enemies. Delegates from 17 species arrived that day, not trusting, but curious, and among them were warriors and scholars, leaders and civilians. And in the center stood Travak, no longer just a guest, no longer a voice lost between two worlds, but something new, something chosen. He stood before them not with speeches, but with memories. He spoke of his crash, of the hands that healed him, the coffee too bitter, the laughter too bright, the quiet kindness in the face of fear. He spoke of Sarah, of Mason, of children who had never fired a weapon, yet stood on the same line as soldiers because humans did not separate their future from their present. And he ended not with a demand, but with a promise. I stand with them, not because they are perfect, not because they are strong, but because they are trying harder than any species I have ever known to be better. And I ask not for your alliance. I ask you to look for yourselves and decide if that effort is not worth defending. For a moment there was only silence, and then one by one the delegates stood and placed a marker in the circle, not a signature, not a contract, just a small piece from their homeworld's soil, stone, shell memory, until the center of the garden was filled with fragments of 17 worlds lying side by side in peace. Broadcast went live across 5 sectors, and for the first time in history, Earth was not speaking alone, and the Galactic High Command watched and said nothing, because even they knew now that something irreversible had begun. That night, Travak stood again on the deck, and Sarah joined him holding 2 cups of coffee, one for him, one for herself, and they stood without words watching the sky as a new formation appeared above them, not a fleet, not a threat, but ships carrying citizens from across the stars, volunteers, researchers, builders, dreamers, all coming to learn, to help, to stand beside the species once feared above all. You did it, she said quietly. No, he answered, we did it, and it is only the beginning. Behind them, the Unity Garden glowed under the moonlight, and the stones from 17 worlds shone together as if they had always belonged beside one another. And in that light, Travak finally saw the future, not as a soldier, not as a Galactic, not even as a guest of Earth, but as part of something that had never existed before, a family born not of blood or war, but of choice. In that moment, he knew the war was not over, but the battle for truth had been won. The final message to the stars. The message was not planned. There was no grand committee, no signed approval or diplomatic filter. It began with a child, not from Earth, not from the Galactic worlds, but from a small moon station orbiting a forgotten gas giant. Her name was Ilna. She was only 7 solar cycles old, and her drawing had been found on a visitor wall of the Unity Garden, drawn with broken crayons and soft lines. It showed creatures of every shape and color, standing in a circle holding hands, and in the middle was a bright star with one word written in shaky letters together. Someone took a picture of it and uploaded it to the civilian net within hours. The image spread across human colonies. By morning it had reached the border sectors, and by midday it had crossed into enemy territory. Even Galactic soldiers were looking at it quietly, without orders or commands. They just stared. Sarah was the one who printed it, enlarged it, and placed it at the council chamber's entrance. Not because it was strategy, not because it was Needed but because it was true, and Travak stood beside it watching species pause as they entered leaders, warriors, traitors, stopping in front of a child's hope drawn on a wall, and every single one of them nodded without words in orbit around Earth. The ships were changing. 2 old battlecruisers now carried cargo for rebuilding missions. Weapon platforms were retrofitted for science projects, and war drones now scanned for diseases and pollution. Instead of enemies, the transition was not perfect. Mistakes were made, some borders were still tense, some species remained skeptical, but something had shifted, something that no war or negotiation had ever managed to create before. Trust, not blind trust, but earned, real, slow growing, unshakable. Final message was not meant to be final. It was just a recording sent from the Unity Garden on the 3rd anniversary of the Alliance. Earth broadcasted it on open frequency and offered it to anyone listening, even enemies, even silent watchers. And in the message there were no generals, no speeches, just ordinary voices speaking from every corner of the project. A mechanic from Mars, a farmer from Sarlin, a Gorlat teacher from Travak's home sector, a child who had never seen war, but now played in peace. And last was Travak, his voice clear, tired, honest. We once feared the Deathworlders because fear is easy, fear is ancient, it is survival, but humanity taught us that survival alone is not life, and war is not the only path to peace. Humans are not perfect, but they are trying every day. In every way they fall and rise and fall again, but they do not give up. And when they say, "We are family," they do not say it for strategy, they say it because they mean it. And now we say it too together. We stand not because it is safe, not because it is easy, but because it is right. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The message echoed across thousands of systems. Some never replied. Some ignored it, but others answered, not in words but in action. Ships rerouted toward Earth stations, rebuilt under human Gorlak codes. Research data shared without cost, food aid sent without demand, and slowly the map of the galaxy began to change, not through war, but through will. Travak returned to his home world, not as a spy, not as a traitor, not even as a leader, but as a guest. And when he stood in front of the old council, who once condemned him, they did not speak, they only listened. And when he finished, they bowed their heads, not in surrender, but in understanding. His people joined the Alliance not through fear, but through choice, and other species followed one by one, not all at once, but enough to matter. Enough to tip the balance from isolation to unity, from suspicion to hope. Years later, in the center of the Unity Garden, a monument was built, not of steel or power, but of pieces donated from every member. World glass from underwater cities, bark from trees that grew on lava worlds, crystal mined from moons no one could pronounce, and at the top a plaque engraved in every known language, and a few still being translated. Galaxy changed not when war ended, but when fear was no longer needed, and it all began with those we feared. The Moss Deathworlders. The Moss Deathworlders. Before it on the 10th anniversary, gray at the edges, slower than before, but stronger, and around him children from 27 species ran through the garden, laughing in languages not even the translators could keep up with, and beside him Sarah. Now Ambassador Sarah handed him a cup of coffee, still bitter, still too strong, and still perfect. We feared them once, he said softly, and now we are them, she answered smiling. Not feared, he said, just known. She nodded, and they stood in silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything had already been said, and still echoed through the stars. The war was over, the fear was over, the future